Thank you, Kelly, and welcome to this seminar, which is, of course, part of this year's Open Banking Expo DigiFest. I'm Joe McGrath, Consulting Editor for Open Banking Expo magazine, and I'm pleased to say that today we are joined by Phelim O'Donnell, the Chief Operating Officer at Starling. Hello, Phelim.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Now, I'm sure it will come as no surprise to you to learn that today we're going to be exploring how Starling has been striving to drive value across its customer base by using open banking. But before we start, I'd like to ask if you would mind by kicking off to give us some highlights of your career to date, and outlining some of your career experience, as well as perhaps explaining some of your current role at Starling.
So thanks, Joe. I joined Starling about a year ago, and I don't know if you've seen Anne Boden's book, Banking on It, or Banking on IT, whichever way you want to read it. Came out last week. I'm on page 16 and 17 of that book. I got a kind of like a paragraph. But I had the opportunity to work with Anne back in Ireland, and I should say I'm based in Ireland. I'm actually based in Dublin. I'm going to say she came down in about 2012. So I was working for one of the large banks in Ireland, and I'd been there since 1998. So kind of one of my first jobs out of college, and I graduated as I was a COBOL programmer. Believe it or not, those do still exist. And I was working on one of the core accounting systems. So I got that kind of traditional upbringing in a traditional bank, a large bank with all its kind of processes, its structures. And I got the pleasure of working in the mainframe space for that as well, in the technology space. So moved, delivery management, IT management, and then into kind of project program management. Some of the larger transformation programs that would have happened across the bank. And when I got the opportunity to work with Anne, she came in as COO for the bank that I was working for, and helped kind of drive a transformation within the organization. And I did that for a couple of years after Anne left as well. And then spent 4 years working for Liberty Mutual, actually, the big insurance company based out of the US. They've got an IT presence in Ireland, and I headed up the Dublin office for that and got heavily involved back into IT again because the project and program management takes you out of it a little bit. So it was nice to get back involved. It was a delivery director for infrastructure services into Liberty Mutual for the Irish subsidiary. So for the last year, I've been working for Starling and helping to lead out the kind of the international piece. So that was progressing up to a point, and then COVID hit. So when COVID hit, we kind of did a bit of a rethink on everything, because you have to look at what your business model is going to be, how the economic impact. And a lot of that's unknown, especially when it kind of immediately hit in March. So we took the decision to take a step back for a period. And during that time, I've been actively involved in the technology part, actually doing information security and first line operational management, in Starling operational risk management. So, which has absolutely been brilliant, just getting in and getting to know everybody and how everybody works. And actually, one of the benefits of COVID, believe it or not, is because I'm based in Dublin, it doesn't matter that I'm not in the office in London because nobody else is. So I've had an opportunity to get in, know everybody, and work kind of deeply within Starling over the last 6 months. We're picking up again, obviously, in the international side now as well. So putting that hat back on again as the COO for Starling International.
I've got to ask, Starling's got such a great reputation for its corporate culture, and the workforce, everyone that you see speaking publicly or that you meet, whether it's these days virtually or face to face, they've got such a great story to tell. I want to just link that, if I can, to how that sort of comes across to your customer base, because one of the things that you've pinpointed as seeking to do at the moment is to drive value across the customer base. And before we sort of get into that, I guess it'd be good to sort of unpick what that means. What's the sort of the Starling priority at the moment as far as driving value is concerned?
So you've hit on this. Is I love talking about this, and having spent years as a program manager trying to drive transformation, you kind of start with, or if you're doing it right, I think anyway, you start with the culture, you start with ways of working, and then you can kind of figure out the hows but you got to figure out the why first of all, and how people actually interact with each other and how they work with each other. Advances in technology mean that we can do things differently now than we did years ago. And that means that, I'm sure you're well affair with agile ways of working, lean ways of working. I used to use that language all the time in previous roles, because you're trying to educate people, you're trying to bring them along, you're trying to explain what it is that you want things to look like. I never hear that word mentioned in Starling, because it's just the way that we do things. Nobody has to explain we're trying to be an agile organization. We just are an agile organization, and what that actually means is, if you bring this down to the people who've written a lot about this, who talk a lot about this, people like Eric Ries in the Lean Startup, you have the ability to actually engage a lot more with your customer and get real time feedback and act on that real time feedback. But that's very, very hard to do if you don't have that core culture and that core ability to be flexible in what you do. And I loved, used to take the word agile out of the conversation every now and again and put the word flexible in, and it never worked, because agile had become this noun, as opposed to a verb, and or adjective. And I think that's at the core of what we do in Starling. So it does come from the culture. It comes from the way of working. It comes from actually breaking things down and saying, well, why are we doing things the way that we're doing it? And then once you've got that, then you can start to build product really quickly, and you can deliver it to market really quickly, and you can get feedback from customers in terms of what they want really quickly. And I think it's interesting. People talk about a 24-month plan, and we don't have a 24-month plan. We might have high level things that we think might be important to us, but actually we tend to be able to react and flip then. And something like Bibbles this year was a prime example of that. That wasn't on a horizon at all for us, and then overnight it became the number one priority, and within 2 weeks we were able to roll out the technology, we were able to roll out the process and the governance that sits behind it, because as an organization we can all shift priority to that for that moment in time. And you can't do that in other organizations. You just, the level of rigidity in there, to use the opposite of the word flexibility, but it starts with the culture. It starts with the way of working. So I think you've absolutely nailed it in that question.
I think that there's a lot there that I think our audience would like us to explore a bit further. So I'm just going to drill down to a couple of elements, specifically relating to strategy. Starling has an ever-growing marketplace. So how do you plan to sort of scale that element of the business?
So marketplace actually is a growing space for us. We've now got 25 marketplace partners, and the thing for us in marketplace, it's one thing getting more and more marketplace partners engaged and part of our ecosystem. The other thing is driving real value out from those engagements, and actually starting to see where we can add more and more on top of those partnerships. So, and this is a really interesting thing for me in the open banking space, because I don't think people have really grasped yet the power of it. So, you've got this mantra that comes and says banks have to do A, B, and C in terms of being able to share their data. And then people tend to think, okay, well, I've got that bank data. How can I use that bank data? And we're not necessarily fully there yet in terms of customers, and really thinking what could be a huge value add for customers. And you're looking for that kind of complementary innovation where somebody else is going to come across and start to think of us less as a bank and somebody who offers different things that customers need. And whether that's payment services, or whether it's information on their bank accounts, or whether it's other things like being able to offer real-time vouchers. What we tend to see is other kind of fintech players coming in and being part of our marketplace. So whether that's a pensions offering or an accounting package offering. What we haven't seen yet is somebody thinking completely left field and saying, I could do this if I had banking data. And I think, what we're trying to do with our marketplace is get more and more people to come and partner with us on it. But we're also trying to see what can we do additionally with the partners that we have that actually add something that customers don't even necessarily know that they need yet, but would add huge value to.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the other strategic question then, if we're talking about, you talked about agile being a buzzword that's thrown around a lot. Let's talk about the others. Innovation, that's another one that's chucked around a lot. it's probably one of the most overused words in this particular market, and I think in technology more broadly, but certainly in this market. If we try to nail down Starling's approach to innovation and its plans for growth, what would you say that they're sort of anchored on? Is the strategy to sort of to innovate through a sort of organic growth or through acquisition? How does Starling stay ahead of the game?
So if you look at what we've done recently, and again I go back to what happened during kind of lockdown. One of the products that we brought out was the ability for a customer to have a card on their account where they could manage that completely. So they could move money into their space. We call it spaces within our core account, and they could manage. Then they could give that card to somebody else to use, but they could manage the money going in and out, and they get notification anytime the card is used. And other people were trying to come up with solutions for people who had to stay in their homes but still needed other people to, people who were great to actually offer help to them. How could they give them money to go out and buy things for them? And we're able to kind of pivot on some of the stuff that we were doing with expense cards, etc. And we're able to say this is a need that's there in the market right now. So let's make this available to our customers where they can give somebody else access to a particular part of their account without giving them access to all of their accounts, and they'll see all the transactions coming through on their mobile as soon as it happens. We've then extrapolated off from that and offered the Kite card, which is the children's card. So I was one of the test groups for this, and I tell you, I have a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, and they absolutely love their Starling cards. But again, it's almost like a tracking device for me. Anytime they use it, I know where they've used it. There's a level of control that kind of comes with it, and that I think, and these are now paid for products as well, right? So the Kite card, and this is a new kind of strategic approach for us, is that where we're adding, so you get your core account and everything that goes with that for free, but where we're adding something that a customer wants to opt in and say, yeah, that's value for money, I'll take that, then there's additional products and features coming out with that. We've had a huge take up on the Kite card, way bigger than we expected. But that's those two things married as well, right? Because we didn't set out and say we're going to create a Kite card. But what we did see was how people were using the card for expense management, and then for the during COVID. And we said, well, actually, the base functionality for this we can do quite quickly and bring out into the Kite space, the children's space. And that's, I think that comes back to ways of working, right? That comes back to the ability to kind of pivot or have an agility in what you're doing. We didn't start out at the start of the year and say, right, a priority for us is going to be this Kite card. And yet we're able to launch that when we see there's an opportunity or something that people actually want in the marketplace.
And just on that same question, where we talk about the sort of evolution of innovation, I mean, you must have seen, as I have, the numerous column inches that have been dedicated in the sort of mainstream press to do with the commercial imperative that the innovators need to operate under and how they need to have this awareness. Would you say that there is a sort of that sort of commercial end goal that sort of exists through the culture of Starling as you're trying to innovate? Or is it very much, as you say, with the success of Kite Card, it's all about getting that product buy-in and letting the customers lead the success?
So we've been pretty clear about this from the outset, that we want to be financially sustainable as an organization. And to do that, you have to make money. So it's not just about customer growth, customer growth, customer growth. You have to have something that actually makes you sustainable as an organization. That's something the regulator looks for. It's something that we as an organization look for. So that has been a priority all along. Now, the beauty of that is if you can align that with customer value, and you can actually get customers to opt and say, yes, I'm willing to pay for this, and you understand what that is, and you're able to kind of to move with that. So Anne came out at I think Q3, Q4 last year and said that we were going to make a profit by the end of 2020. And we had plans and we had strategy as an organization as we sat down in Q1 this year. We had priorities in terms of how we were actually going to achieve that. And then the world changed in March. Now we're still going to achieve that because it's been part of our core. We're going to be a sustainable bank that offers stability to our customers. But the way that we're actually going to achieve that by year end is fundamentally different to what we thought it was in Q1. We've gone hugely into the SME space as part of the Bibbles. We're doing a lot of lending in that space that we hadn't projected at the start of the year. So it's about having that, you're right. It's at a core. It's a priority as an organization, and we need to constantly bring ourselves back to that and concentrate on it, but not at the expense of customer value. So it's integrated.
Yeah, I do remember Anne making the statement. I think at the time it was fascinating to see such a transparent and explicit commitment, and it's wonderful that you guys are getting there, given especially what's happened this year. Um, I don't want to sort of dwell on that part of things. I think it's it's really important that we talk about some of the other initiatives and progress that you've made to date. So, can you talk about some of Starling's specific open banking initiatives, which perhaps you're either most proud of, or that might have been under the radar, which have been an enormous success and have sort of fed that innovation or learning?
So I think we've launched a toolkit for SME customers, and again, that's a paid for product. So this is where we've partnered with different people through Marketplace, and we've seen that interaction of things like accounting packages, where we can feed information through to accounting packages, and it makes life easier for SMEs. It makes life easier for people to be able to do their accounts, etc. We're now building on top of that additional functionality for people in managing their day to day business. And again, that's something that's you look at those core partnerships, and then you see, right, how do we add additional value on top of that? So that's constantly what we're looking for. I think you look in the banking as a service space, and we haven't really done as much in that space. We've done more of the kind of the marketplace partnerships. I think certainly from an international perspective, there's a huge opportunity there for us, especially where we don't have brands in other markets. For people to actually put a brand in front of our bank account, and you can start to see some kind of complementary innovation coming through there. If people have the foresight to say, right, how could my customers and under our brand have additional value, from some of the things that we offer as an organization. I think that's a really, really intriguing one for us. Certainly, as we move into other countries that don't have a Starling brand or Starling presence at the moment, it's a little bit harder for us to do in the UK, where we're building our own brand and we've got such prominence now coming through. You don't necessarily want to be riding banking as a service to an alternative brand as well. But I think something like that in the open banking space could offer huge value for us internationally.
Forgive me for the next question because it's been a tough year, but I think it's one which I've asked several of your peers. I think it's only fair that I ask you as well. Given what's happened this year, let's just pin that over there on the table. But if you could go back in time, it doesn't have to be this year, but if you could go back and change anything about the Starling journey so far, or your journey within Starling, what would it be?
So I'd actually say it has been a horrendous year, and we can talk about COVID and we can talk about it in a business sense. There's an awful lot of people out there have personal impact from COVID, and I don't want to kind of put that to one side. I want to kind of acknowledge that, but what I'd say is that we actually reacted quickly to what's happened this year, and I'm actually genuinely really proud of the way that we as an organization have reacted to that. And I think for me personally within Starling, I was booking my flights to try and be in London, if not at least once a month, probably twice a month, because having had that experience, and my experience is in kind of change management and transformation, I know how important it is to absorb and feel part of an organization. I've also managed, in managed part of an organization where the main part of an organization is somewhere else, and it's really, really hard to feel part of that culture and absorb as you go. So those are all things that I was looking at personally and saying, right, I need to commit to actually be fully part of Starling, from Dublin, which is effectively a UK company. And the technology that we're using now allows me to not have to travel to do that. And then, I now have daily interactions, multiple daily interactions with everybody. So from a personal perspective, I suppose that's the big thing for me. And if anything, I'd actually change that to happen sooner. I'd use the technology a lot sooner. It's kind of forced us down a path now where we're doing that. I'll be honest, from a Starling perspective, and you read Anne's book. There's an awful lot of stuff happened in the early days that I'm sure she'd like to change if she could. There's a lot of pain there, I think, that comes out through the book. But in terms of where we are right now, I don't think anybody in Starling would say, "Yeah, I'd change X, Y, and Z," because I think, given where we are now, the culture that we have as an organisation, and where we're placed as an organisation, take advantage of the foundation that we've put in place. I don't think we change anything.
I think these sorts of conversations, it can be very tempting to sort of go down the rabbit hole of the corporate. And I think you've given a good balance so far of between the sort of corporate priorities and the customer experience as well. But the one question, I guess, that I think we haven't covered off, I think, we maybe looked at the success of things like Kite Card, for instance. But if you had to identify a single product that you've offered so far, which has become particularly popular or the most popular with customers, what would you say that is?
I think the whole package itself, to be honest with you, I mean, like, we're still in a place in Ireland where digital banks are not pervasive throughout. I think we've come to accept digital banks within the UK because there's a couple of different offerings there, and people are used now to dealing with it. I mean, even the notion that you're able to just go and tap your mobile. I go for a run on a Sunday morning and I'm wearing my watch with me. I don't need to bring loads of things now, in case I need to kind of stop off for something and a drink or whatever. Um, the, the data that's available within your application, the ease of use, the notifications, the fact that, and this is especially important for me, I'm from Northern Ireland originally, so when I travel up north, we've a feature in our account that allows you to set up a separate GBP and a separate Euro account within the same card, and it knows where you are and it takes out of the relevant account when you're in that country. Previously you'd be going through the FX, you wouldn't have a clue what percentage you're paying on your FX as you're going through it, and you're just hoping for the best as you pay for something. I have total control within a second, of actually knowing what's in each of those accounts, and the card allows me to do that when we're going through. The notification part of it is absolutely massive. And then, this year we really got into the lending space, which is huge for us. And the unfortunate nature of Bibbles and all the circumstances that kind of created that in the first place. Our ability, Bibbles was done in a certain way, and it was done correctly. The government and the British Business Bank engaged with the large banks to set up the program, because the large banks account for 80% plus of all the SME population within the UK. So we got that documentation late in the day. We had to apply to become members late in the day, and then we had a very, very short time frame to try and turn everything around. And our ability to do that, and where we've gone since then, and I'm really happy with our attitude through all of that as well. In terms of our understanding of the rules and how they apply, and our application of it. All of those things, it's very, very hard for me to answer one thing. In terms, I actually think the whole package itself. And what I always say to people, it's not just about what Starling has now, it's what Starling's going to have in 6 months' time and 12 months' time, because you can see a lot of the legacy banks, a lot of the traditional players can kind of scramble and do things after, the likes of ourselves have kind of brought things out. But we're already moving on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And I think that's going to be the challenge for some of the bigger players. And it's the solid foundation that I talked about from a Starling perspective that allows us to kind of carry this out.
So you said there about COVID allowing Starling to get into the lending space in a big way. What are the future products that you have in the pipeline over the coming 12 or 24 months? And have those been coloured by what's happened over the past year?
So I think we've got our SIF obligations, so under the Capital Innovation Fund, and we've called out there the things that we're going to deliver, specifically for SMEs over the next 12 or 24 months. But I'll go back and say what I said earlier. We've got high level priorities of things that we want to try and roll out, but we don't necessarily think in a 24-month or a 12-month time frame. It's more about, like, what's our current priorities. There's a high level couple of projects we're doing at the moment just around some core infrastructure pieces, but also, the top up rules came out for the Bibble scheme about a week ago. So that's been a big focus of it, and being able to just switch that on. Like there's a lot of engineering work that goes into that. People working over the weekend to make sure that functionality is available to people when they come out. I think lending has to be a core part of any bank. You go back to sustainability. It's how banks make money. So yeah, lending is a big feature of that, and we want to continue to do the business that we're doing in that space. But your growth
sorry,
is sorry, go on.
I was just going to ask as well. You said that lending has to be core to any bank to be commercially successful. Is it difficult to structure the sort of underwriting, the monitoring processes as well as the sort of functional aspects that the customer sees?
Yeah, so in theory, yes. What we've got in Starling, and I say this a lot, is people think of fintechs, they think of startups, they think of hipsters, they think of people hanging out with ping pong tables. And yeah, there's a bit of that in Starling, right? Like we had our ping pong table on the second floor in Finsbury Avenue, but actually there's a lot of seasoned bankers around the organization and people who've been in this game for a long time. And I think that's the blend that you have with Starling, is the drive and the appetite that you get from a startup and from a fintech, but also there's a lot of experience there. And finding that blend of people who weren't happy with the status quo, but have the experience of knowing what it means to comply with regulation, what it means to make responsible credit decisions, but also to be able to add customer value while you're doing it. We have that blend within Starling, and that's going to remain to be a focus for us going forward, both in terms of who we hire and how we bring people in, but also in our approach to everything that we do. And this has kind of struck me. I mentioned that I was looking after operational risk from a frontline perspective. I grew up in organizations where something goes wrong once and you put a really restrictive process in place. And eventually what you tend to do is take responsibility away from people and you put it on process. And if you build that up over 30 or 40 years, what you end up, and this is the world that I kind of operated in for a long time, people understanding how a process works and understanding that really well and getting promoted because they can manage a process really well, without a fundamental understanding of why that process is in place or why that process is there in the first place. What's the fundamental risk that you're trying to address with that process? And what's really struck me in Starling and all the engagement I've had over the last 6 months plus, every time we debate something, it'll come back to a core question. What are we trying to achieve? Why are we doing it this way? What's the risk that we're trying to address? And everybody has that in their mindset. There's no dissociation from accountability or responsibility. Responsibility is encouraged. One of our core values, own it. So own it doesn't mean put your arms around it and don't let anybody else in. Own it means take accountability for your actions, understand why you're doing something, and don't just sit back and go, well, somebody told me, or that's the way the process works. And I think, so we take that approach to our technology, but we also take that approach to our operations, whether that's credit operations and all the other processes that need to go in from a lending and underwriting decision-making perspective. But it fundamentally comes back to that core culture. Own it, take responsibility, understand why.
Yeah. I think the more I learn about the Starling culture, the more fascinating it becomes. And I think it says a lot about where the sort of evolution of the so-called new market entrants. I mean, you're not that new anymore, but the way that people learning about this market and reading about it think of Starling will be coloured by those sort of questions that you ask. I think the other thing relating to that, which would be a good question to ask you, is as to whether the landscape of challenger bank versus incumbent bank is changing, because traditionally it's always been one is playing off against the other. Do you think that there's a new threat to the digital banking market now? Where's that threat coming from?
So this is an interesting one, right? Because and Anne's pretty vocal about this. when do we stop becoming a challenger bank and when do we start becoming an established bank? And who are our competitors? Are the other challenger banks, or are they just banks? And we certainly see ourselves as a bank. We just happen to have really good technology and really good corporate culture, and we see huge opportunity in that. I think what you've seen, especially over the last 6 months, is some of the big challenge coming from um, if if the challenger banks, if the fintech, if they're not making money, that can prove exceedingly challenging. Going back through your funding rounds, trying to get money to keep your business going. So that's been an obvious piece, and that's why making money for us is such a core part of our strategy. But our ambitions are big. We want to be one of the established banks in the UK. So what that actually means, are we still a challenger bank? We can be an established bank, but have that.
So I guess the follow-up question to that is to ask, how do you anticipate that the financial services landscape more broadly is going to look in, say, 5 or 10 years' time? And this is I appreciate the killer question, because it's time to dust off the crystal ball. But if you had to make one prediction, what would you say?
Well, I see Starling being a major player. Let's start with that. But to be honest, I think this is one of the really interesting things. To go back to what I said earlier about open banking, I think you're gonna start to see people who grasp the opportunity of open banking and start to see the possibilities. I mean, when I've heard people, certainly other banks, talk about this previously, people tend to talk about compliance and what they need to do under, whether it's open banking or PSD2, what they need to do to make the APIs available. What I haven't really heard a lot of people talking about is customer value underwritten by some of those open banking opportunities. And I think you're going to start to see some pretty smart people out there starting to figure out, hold on, if we did this, we could. And then you're going to see stuff that's fundamentally different. I think, some of the stuff's accelerated this year through COVID. People are going more and more technology savvy. Cash is leaving the system. And the better your mobile proposition, the better your digital proposition as a bank, the more valuable you're going to be to your customers. So, are we going to have the same breakout of players across, the UK banking space? I'm not sure. I know that there's a huge opportunity for us to, like, at the end of the day, if we just keep adding value for our customers, then we're going to get bigger and bigger, as people kind of understand who we are and what we can do for them. So I don't have a crystal ball for what all financial service is going to look like. What I'd say is look out for people who are going to innovate on top of the open banking piece, and look out for people who have the best digital propositions, because I think that's going to be more and more important over the next years, as we knew it would be anyway, right? I think the last 6 months just accelerated that a little bit.
And I guess to round that off with a subsequent question, we've seen an enormous amount of investment in recent years into those who could be the banks of tomorrow, that could be the pension providers of tomorrow. There's challenges across all areas of financial services right now. Do you think that investment and that appetite for investment in this particular sector is going to persist, or do you think now that there's started to be a critical mass of those who've made a success of being challengers, that actually that appetite might wane a little?
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to answer that, right? So that's not really my space of expertise. What I would say is, if I was investing in something, what I'd be looking for is sustainability and profitability. And how are you actually, as an investor, how are you going to make money from this? And I think those are the really important things. I think what you're probably going to see accelerated over the next few years is who are the ones that are actually going to be here, in 5 years' time, and who are the ones that are going to be, yeah, we had a really good core proposition, but actually we couldn't figure out how to make it practical to people, that they're actually going to pay money for it. So I don't know. I honestly don't know. But if I was an investor, those are the things that I'd be thinking about. And I think what you will see is some of those digital propositions will be sustainable. So that will drive investment.
It's fascinating. Phelim, thank you so much. I think there's a lot we can take away from that. Before we throw it over to the Q&A, I'm just going to go through some of the points that you made there, which I think might stimulate the discussion. I think throughout we got a feeling from you that the important thing to Starling, there's two sort of core things which stand out for me, and that is first of all customer value, but also that banks need to make money, and the two go hand in hand. I think the other thing that was quite clear that came across right from the beginning, even though that we talked about how this word is chucked about, the importance of being agile. People talk a good game, but sometimes they can't necessarily do it in practice. You discussed about marketplace. You're seeking to attract more partners, but also do more of existing partners. And again, the focus on sustainability, I think, is commendable, whether that be for Starling or anyone else. I think it's also worth noting about the Starling's reaction to COVID-19, which, as we've now seen, has been a superb reaction and has allowed you to embrace different areas of the market, particularly to get into the lending space in a big way. And as you say, lending has to be the core to any bank. And I think there's a few that would disagree with that. One final thing to think about, I think, is how you describe yourself. Which is when you describe Starling as we are a bank, but with great tech and great corporate culture. So if anyone wants to call you anything else, I think there might be some time for a discussion on that point. So without further ado, I'm going to throw it open to the Q&A, but thank you so much, and let's see what people have to ask.
Thanks, Joe.
Welcome back to the interactive part of this particular session, where we get to hear the answers to some of your questions. Phelim, thank you for staying with us. I'd like to start with the big news of the week with Starling, and unless you've been living under a rock somewhere, you can't have not seen it. It's the what you discussed in the pre-record there, talking about the move towards profitability and actually getting there and putting your flag down and saying we've made it. A good opener, I guess, would be to sort of dissect that somewhat and to ask just how difficult is that, not just to reach profit, but to do so while you're pursuing an ambitious growth agenda?
Yeah, it comes down to priorities, I think, and what your focus is as an organization. And as you say, I said this in the pre-record. We had Anand came out a year ago and said we were going to be profitable as an organization, and you talk to regulators, and that's what they're really interested in. How can you prove that you're going to be a sustainable organization? And we've had a focus on that. And we had a plan at the start of this year that said, this is how we're going to be profitable. And then COVID happens and you have to completely flip that plan on its head. But we had that focus, and we've always had that focus. And there's two elements to that. There's kind of revenue generation, and then there's making sure that you manage your cost base and you're effectively managing your cost base as you work through it. And that takes, it takes a lot of kind of focus and a lot of attention. So it's very difficult. And I think that's what you've seen with Starling, that kind of marriage of experienced people, experienced bankers that sitting at the top table with energetic people with a lot of drive and a lot of entrepreneurial spirit to actually, go out there and change the banking industry and do something fundamentally different. But go back to that word focus. It is hard, and it's a tough message to keep kind of coming through, because every now and again you go, right, when can we relax? But you can't, and that's kind of that's kind of born through. And yeah, I mean, it was a huge milestone for us when we announced that we've actually become profitable for the first time, and I think it's onwards and upwards. It's great news, but it's on to the next thing now. So how do we start competing even higher and even more?
I'm good. I mean, obviously, it looks fantastic from the outside. You've managed to do something which was an enormous feat, and you've rightly got the recognition for that now. But I'm just going to put you on the spot, if I may, because this is what the Q&A is all about. What's it like having someone like Anne driving that sort of ambition and that agenda, where she's demanding so much, because it's something which a lot of people haven't managed to achieve? Does that take its toll on you as a leader in the business?
I love it. So I worked. I met Anne for the first time when she came into the organization that I worked for 18 years. And when you work in a large organization, you can kind of get used to a layer of, I call it a layer of fat, a layer of kind of contingency around everything. So you don't necessarily have the urgency. You don't, that level of kind of expectation. So when I met Anne for the first time, she made it clear that she had very different expectations in terms of what I'd been used to before. And I find my performance levels skyrocket. It's kind of exponential change. And it's just that level of expectation coming in on top of you to kind of drive you to do a little bit more. And, for the last number of years when I've been driving out transformation programs and you're trying to explain to people how to kind of operate at a different level. There's a book by a guy called Dan Pink, Drive, which talks about mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And these three, he's done studies he's done it from Harvard to the streets of Mumbai. What is it that drives people? And if you're working in a complex environment, paying people more money doesn't necessarily produce better productivity or better results. You have to have the combination of having a sense of purpose. What are we doing this for? Why are we doing it? You have that sense of mastery. So there's something inside you that wants to constantly improve yourself and do something better. And then you have the autonomy to be able to do that as well. So you're given enough context to operate within, but then you're given ownership and you feel a level of ownership within that as well. And I think that's what we have in Starling is we understand the purpose. We understand, we have a collective sense of ownership and responsibility for the organization and a collective sense of pride. And, you were saying this to me offline is you've seen the amount of employees who've come out with a level of pride in terms of what we achieved last week. But that is from that common sense of purpose throughout the organization. But we also have autonomy, and we do make mistakes, but we're not called out for it. We're expected to learn from it, but we're given the opportunity to actually go and try things. And I think one of the things in the corporate culture that we have is we look for people who have that sense of, I want to be better. I want to constantly continue to learn, continue to grow, and have that kind of mastery thing behind them. It's what drives you. Like, why do people run marathons? Why do people learn how to play the guitar or whatever? There's something inside you that just wants to keep improving, and that's the people that we look for in Starling as well. So I think it is tough. I won't say it isn't, but it's brilliant. I wouldn't have it any other way.
You talk about having the opportunity to learn, and I'm conscious of the time, so I'm just going to finish off with one question, which might inspire a few people that are watching this right now. If you were going back and you could speak to yourself 20 years ago and you could pick just one thing as a piece of advice, what would it be?
Be ambitious, right? Because I did a conversion course, masters in computer science, and I went in knowing nothing about computers. I'd done an engineering degree, and this is back in the day that they were teaching Fortran as a programming language. So I had a nervousness then going into industry because I was competing for jobs against people who'd done 4-year degrees with a year in industry, and I had a 1-year conversion course. And you go in thinking other people know more than you do. And that's the same as you kind of accelerate through an organization or as you get promoted through an organization. You think the people in the management layer above you inherently know or are better qualified than you, know more than you. And in reality, a lot of the time they just have access to more information and they have more context. So if you're curious and you go out and you find that context for yourself, what I always look for anybody that works for me is that I look for them to have an opinion, and I look for them to change that opinion or be able to change that opinion based on new information. And I think that's probably my biggest thing is be ambitious and have an opinion, but listen, right, and be prepared to change your opinion based on new information.
Do you know what, I could ask you probably another 50 questions, and I'm sure you'll get a few more follow-ups on email discreetly after this. For now, I think we have to leave it there due to the time constraints, but thank you so much, William. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Joe.
I'll hand back to Kelly.